poisoning communities all across our country, targeting our most vulnerable, our children. It's laced in pills that people buy on the street or given to you by a friend.
In Minneapolis, Minnesota, before dawn, a story began to take shape amid darkness and federal scrutiny. What first appeared to the public as a headline involving a statement by Congresswoman Ilhan Omar about a relative being stopped by Immigration and Customs Enforcement was, according to investigators, part of a much broader sequence of events already underway. Days earlier, federal monitoring units had flagged a video rapidly circulating on social media, originating within her congressional district, an area authorities were already watching due to large-scale narcotics trafficking, missing cash flows, and organized criminal activity. The situation escalated when a young Somali student named Camille Hersey posted a calm but explicit video message warning that he would target ICE agents if they entered his neighborhood. As the video spread across TikTok and private channels, it reached federal surveillance teams within hours, at a time when threats against immigration officers nationwide had sharply increased. Regardless of later explanations or retractions, the seriousness of the statement prompted investigators to widen their inquiry, marking a turning point in an investigation rooted in drugs, money, and fear rather than rumor. Investigators soon began linking the viral video to a far more serious pattern emerging in the surrounding area. Drug-related overdoses and hospitalizations in nearby residential neighborhoods had quietly surged, increasing by more than 260% in under a year, while unmarked vehicles associated with narcotics activity were repeatedly observed, moving through zones near student housing and international academic communities. What had once seemed distant now affected working-class families, elderly residents, and long-established community members who had never previously encountered organized street-level crime. Financial analysis revealed recurring microtransactions, small payments repeated so frequently that they accumulated into millions of dollars moving through layered accounts. The pattern appeared deliberate rather than random, pointing to a carefully engineered system involving individuals who outwardly appeared respectable and community-oriented. For federal investigators, this marked a turning point. The activity was not isolated or rhetorical, but operational and dangerous. As the investigation deepened, analysts determined that the network was not hidden in abandoned streets or alleyways, but embedded behind student housing complexes, assistance programs, and rental apartments near an international campus. Though these locations appeared ordinary on the surface, seized records told a different story. Over an 18-month period, authorities identified more than 86 devices, accounts, and financial channels tied to an underground distribution chain, with transactions deliberately broken into small, seemingly harmless amounts that ultimately totaled more than $187.4 million. GPS data reinforced the consistency of the pattern, and, according to investigators, the leads converged on a single figure, Nuruddin Aydin Osman, 42, described as an alleged coordinator operating discreetly behind the campus infrastructure. Messages, audio logs, and transaction records revealed a pattern of repeated delivery cycles involving more than 1.1 tons of heroin, fentanyl, and other synthetic compounds concealed under benign labels such as books, supplies, and late-night deliveries. Investigators found that Osman had prior links to federal trafficking routes, and financial data recovered from his laptop showed deposits exceeding $7.4 million in just 6 months, an amount far beyond any legitimate source of income. His communications detailed delivery schedules, quantities, and rotating couriers tasked with moving narcotics in small batches to reduce detection. Additional documents exposed a network of rotating safe houses, disposable phones, and map distribution routes spanning Minnesota and 2 neighboring states. Authorities concluded that the suspects connected to the campus were not merely hiding activity, but operating within a structured trafficking system that used the university environment as cover. Based on the accumulated evidence, analysts determined that nearly a ton of fentanyl and cocaine was being staged on campus as part of a secure holding corridor before wider regional distribution. The threat was assessed as high risk and escalating, embedded within student-linked networks rather than traditional street-level gangs. By the time enforcement action began, the campus no longer felt like a place of learning, but a critical fault line in a much larger operation. At 4:32 a.m., Unmarked SUVs moved into position as more than 280 FBI and DEA agents carried out a coordinated sweep supported by aerial reconnaissance and thermal monitoring, identifying activity across multiple facilities and restricted areas. In a secured hallway, investigators observed a figure matching the profile of Nuruddin Aden Osman, the alleged coordinator, marking the culmination of months of intelligence gathering rather than speculation. Teams are set, a calm voice reported as the operation commenced. Entry orders were confirmed, and a controlled breach opened the first access point, letting light spill into the dark corridors. Doors shattered, and floors were methodically clear. Team 1 moved through the western wing, encountering stacked crates, torn tarps, and the strong chemical odor of processing agents, while Team 2 advanced into the central lobby under protective cover. The first confrontation arose in the eastern sector, where two suspects attempted to flee through an emergency exit, ignoring commands to stop. A smaller group escalated the situation by firing from inside a warehouse near the campus perimeter, a brief but chilling exchange that resulted in no civilian injuries thanks to pre-positioned medical units. Inside the warehouse, agents discovered a far more severe operation: steel drums containing heroin, fentanyl precursors, and equipment capable of producing large quantities within hours. This was not mere storage. It was active production across multiple targeted locations. Nearly a ton of narcotics was seized, including heroin, fentanyl compounds, and synthetic batches, capable of generating tens of thousands of illegal doses. Some staged for immediate shipment, others hidden for months. A single notebook documented 214 transfers over 14 months. Behind a reinforced door, Osman sat calmly at a metal table with 3 associates. Phone in hand, without resistance, he was restrained, collapsing his network in a single night. Authorities arrested 23 accomplices on site, recovered $260,000 in cash, 15 handguns, 3 rifles, and detailed ledgers outlining shipments across 3 states and distribution routes marked in red. What began as an online thread had unveiled a sophisticated narcotics network operating in plain sight, and its leader was finally taken into federal custody. By the time the raid concluded and the final evidence crates were secured, many assumed that the threat had ended with Osman's arrest. Yet in the quiet federal review rooms, where analysts worked methodically and without cameras, a more sobering truth emerged. What had been uncovered on campus was only the surface of a far deeper, older, and highly organized network. As seized phones and laptops were decrypted, investigators anticipated routine trafficking, messages, and coordination chatter, but instead uncovered more than 340 encrypted communication threads spanning multiple platforms. The messaging was carefully layered and coded, avoiding any direct reference to narcotics or cash, and marked by a discipline that revealed long-term planning rather than improvisation. Patterns soon became clear. Osman was not issuing orders as a top leader, but functioning as a middle-tier coordinator, relaying instructions within a larger system. Many conversations detailed logistical phases instead of individual operations, discussing transfer windows, discrete corridors, covered routes, and movements designed to remain undetected, a level of organization that suggested the network extended far beyond the campus itself. One thread, spanning nearly 17 months, revealed scheduling blocks carefully aligned with student calendar cycles, semester start dates, housing rotations, and academic travel breaks. The timing was no accident. It was engineered to blend seamlessly into the rhythm of campus life, where constant movement appeared ordinary and unremarkable. A second discovery shifted the tone in the review room. Not all communications were tied directly to the university. A separate network of encrypted channels connected to off-campus locations, including maintenance service contracts, academic support vendors, temporary housing providers, and private assistance programs just beyond campus jurisdiction. On paper, these entities appeared entirely legitimate, processing transactions, employment records, and contractor schedules. Yet together, they formed an invisible second tier of coordination. The pattern was clear. The campus was not the center of the operation, it was the shield. Financial logs tied to this outer layer revealed 23 unregistered service accounts, each moving small recurring expenditures that, when totaled, exceeded $41.8 million over 19 months, none directly linked to Osman. Scattered throughout the message archives, one reference appeared repeatedly: KH, the broker. Never a full name, never a direct instruction, Only markers of approval, short acknowledgments confirming timing, routing, or transfer clearance gradually revealed the structure of the operation. Analysts came to understand that Osman was merely the operator within the environment. Someone else had designed the environment around him. This unknown architect understood institutional systems, financial partitions, and movements that blended seamlessly into normal life, all while deliberately staying outside the perimeter. When the final digital map was projected in the command room, agents did not see a simple street-level operation or a loose criminal ring. Instead, they saw a tiered system, a production layer, a courier layer, a financial layer, and a leadership layer that had yet to appear. The raid had dismantled the machinery, but the architect remained untouched. For the first time, federal officers realized the most dangerous person in the network had never been in the room at all. As investigators dug deeper, the picture grew even more unsettling. This was not a chaotic street operation. It was meticulously planned, quietly executed within spaces considered safe by the public. Seized records revealed not only narcotics, but the scale and rhythm of their movement. 74 shipment logs across 2 years, all using coded labels like materials, packages, or student supply consignments. When cross-referenced with travel routes and transaction schedules, the true scope emerged. Collectively, the volumes amounted to more than 11.2 kilograms of fentanyl-linked compounds and heroin derivatives, enough, according to federal briefings, to endanger tens of thousands of lives if fully circulated. For many older residents, these numbers were more than statistics. They were reminders of families already devastated by addiction and overdose. Households where life had changed quietly, suddenly, and irreversibly. Investigators traced repeated use of storage rooms, basement corridors, and off-campus rental garages near the university, finding no manufacturing equipment, but clear signs of sorting, repackaging, and temporary holding, with items moved in small intervals to avoid detection. What alarmed agents most was not any single location, but the consistency of the procedures across multiple sites, as if the process had been rehearsed and refined over time. Financial records revealed another layer of the operation. Beyond the transfers tied to the network's coordinator, analysts identified more than 280 micropayments spread across student aid cards, prepaid accounts, and charity-style fund channels. Each payment seemed insignificant: $90, $140, $260, but collectively, they formed a system of quiet movement, perfectly synchronized with shipment intervals documented in the logs. For members of the community, especially those who had trusted the programs and institutions surrounding the campus, the realization was deeply unsettling. Spaces intended for education, housing, and support had been turned into cover not through loud or violent acts, but through careful, methodical planning. Recovered messages instructed that activity near academic areas remained minimal during daylight hours, shifting movements to late evenings when foot traffic was thin and security presence lighter. Though no messages mentioned drugs directly, timestamps and GPS markers consistently aligned with known exchange points. For federal agents, the conclusion was clear. This was not a careless, impulsive operation, but a highly organized system that had quietly adapted to its surroundings, learning how trust worked inside the university environment and exploiting it to shield activity that no one thought to question. For families watching from outside, many older residents who had seen generations pass through the campus, the truth sank in slowly. The danger had not come from far away, but had moved quietly through the very places meant to protect the future. When details of the investigation finally reached the public, the reaction was gradual at first, then widespread, touching families, neighborhoods, former students, and longtime residents who had long believed the university was one of the safest places in the city. For many, the news did not feel like a headline. It felt like a personal loss. Within 72 hours of the enforcement sweep, federal briefings confirmed what had already been feared. The network linked to the campus proved far broader, more coordinated, and more deeply embedded in community spaces than anyone had anticipated. Analysts documented more than 36 recurring distribution corridors spanning 3 states, with 74 confirmed shipment cycles, traceable through financial records and device logs. Perhaps most unsettling, at least 19 individuals identified in secondary records had previously been involved in community assistance programs, charity initiatives, or cultural outreach efforts. For many, particularly older residents who had supported these programs for years, the revelation was devastating. Public meetings quickly filled with residents, some expressing disbelief, others anger. while parents who had watched their children graduate from the campus struggled to understand how a system of trust could be exploited to conceal such destructive activity. Retired teachers, church leaders, and former university staff voiced similar emotions. Shock mingled with grief, not only for what had occurred, but for how quietly it had unfolded. Local clinics and social service workers confirmed that the surge in overdose emergencies over the previous 2 years now took on a far more alarming significance, revealing the hidden cost of the network's operations. What had once seemed like scattered tragedies now fit within the timeline investigators were uncovering. Health officials reported that over 280 emergency responses in the region during that period were linked to fentanyl exposure, many involving families who had never expected addiction or drug-related harm to touch their lives. For older community members, these numbers were not abstract. They represented neighbors, church members, former co-workers, people whose lives had been changed quietly and suddenly. During public forums, some residents reflected on why their neighborhoods had felt different at night, why foot traffic along certain streets had increased, or why unfamiliar vehicles appeared briefly and then vanished. The most painful revelations centered on trust. The man identified as the network's coordinator had been present at public events, scholarship ceremonies, and community gatherings for years, often photographed alongside school administrators, faith leaders, and local volunteers, projecting stability, professionalism, and dignity. Federal summaries, however, linked his name to 140 financial trails, 32 courier approvals, and travel logs that repeatedly intersected with shipment timetables. Residents questioned how long the deception had persisted and how deeply it had affected the community. Federal officials emphasized that the investigation was not targeting any culture, faith group, or immigrant population. Rather, organized crime had deliberately embedded itself in spaces built on compassion and support, exploiting trust that was rarely questioned. Public opinion remained sharply divided. Some argued that the enforcement operation had been too broad, too visible, and overly disruptive to students and families with no connection to the network, citing fear inside dormitories, anxiety among international students, and confusion within cultural organizations suddenly under scrutiny. Others maintained that the response had been necessary, not because of who was involved, but because of what was at stake. Lives lost, families torn apart, and a narcotics chain designed to operate in silence. For older residents who had witnessed decades of change in the city, the discussion extended beyond a single case, highlighting how vulnerable trust can be and how easily familiar institutions can be exploited when no one expects it. Across community halls and kitchen table conversations, one sentiment echoed consistently. This was not only a crime story, but also a warning that danger does not always appear where people anticipate it, and that the greatest damage often comes from what moves quietly in spaces thought to be safe. In the days following the campus sweep, many believed the investigation had reached its conclusion, that arrests, seized ledgers, and exposed financial trails marked the end of the story. Yet inside the temporary command center, analysts reached a different conclusion. Each unlocked device, examined transfer record, and reconstructed travel log revealed a network far larger than anyone had imagined. The university was not the starting point, it was the center. When the seized data was cross-referenced with federal databases across neighboring states, a pattern emerged that stunned investigators. Names in the ledgers matched individuals connected to ongoing narcotics inquiries in 4 separate jurisdictions. Phone numbers tied to campus housing began appearing in surveillance records from 2 major transit corridors, signaling a reach far beyond the university. Even more concerning, investigators identified at least 17 secondary coordinators operating across multiple cities, some active, others already missing, their devices powered off within hours of the initial enforcement action. Financial analysis added another layer of revelation. 4 shell organizations, registered under different names but sharing the same digital fingerprints as the network's coordinator, were uncovered. None moved large sums at once. Instead, they conducted hundreds of small transfers, $600 here, $1,900 there, across more than 430 entries. Over time, the combined flow exceeded $3.9 million, routed through donation drives, student aid circles, rental assistance pools, and community support funds, long trusted by older residents who had contributed not only money, but also time, attention, and faith. The discovery was deeply painful. Investigators confirmed that the network was never confined to one location. Reconstructed travel logs from GPS archives revealed 83 recurring routes spanning 3 states, many of which returned not to urban centers but to quiet residential areas. Small community hubs and privately leased homes seamlessly blending into ordinary neighborhoods. None of these locations appeared suspicious to passers-by, and that was exactly why they had been selected. What unsettled analysts most was not only the network's reach, but how deliberately it had adapted to everyday environments. At least 9 individuals identified as runners operated in places where trust was automatic. Local shops, cultural centers, housing support offices, and campus service roles. They drew no attention, altered no routines, their strength lay in familiarity. Encrypted messages recovered from the investigation repeatedly emphasized the network's strategy: keep movement where trust already exists. For families who had lived in the area for decades, many grandparents witnessing their communities change over time, that phrase carried a weight statistics could not convey. The danger had not remained isolated. It had learned the rhythms of the city, the habits of the campus, and the generosity of the people who supported both. At a follow-up briefing, officials revealed more than 70 potential transfer points across several states were under review. Some had gone dormant, while others showed signs of limited recent activity, suggesting parts of the network were pausing, observing how far the investigation would extend. For federal agents, the conclusion was sobering. The raid had removed the central figure and disrupted the network's core structure. But the operation itself was far from eliminated. It had fractured, scattered, and begun shifting further into the background, leaving behind traces as concerning as the evidence already uncovered. For the community, especially older residents who had watched the city evolve over decades, a quiet realization took hold. The danger had never relied on noise, crowds, or confrontation. It had endured because it understood something deeper, that when trust becomes a shield, those who choose to exploit it can move farther than anyone expects. Even as agents prepared the next round of warrants, one question loomed. If a network this extensive could exist in spaces considered safest, how many others might still be hidden, waiting to be discovered? Ultimately, this story was never only about a campus, a coordinator, or a single operation. It was about the quiet ways a network can take shape, inside familiar places, moving not through violence or disruption, but through patience, trust, and silence. The investigation uncovered more than ledgers, devices, and financial trails. It revealed how easily communities can be blindsided when danger learns to blend in, presenting a polite face, attending public events, and occupying spaces people believe are safe. For families who had watched generations pass through the university, the truth was difficult to accept, but it carried an unmissable lesson. Vigilance is not suspicion. It is protection. And as agents continue their work, one reality remains clear. The story may have reached a turning point, but the investigation is far from over.